question then became one of, what is Texas? Does Texas go all the way to the Rio Grande? If it does, that means that Albuquerque and Santa Fe and southern Colorado are part of Texas.
The questions over slavery, borders, and culture caused U.S. President James Polk to prepare for war.
So Polk sends troops between the Nueces and the Rio Grande, knowing full well that if he sends troops into this disputed territory, there's going to be bloodshed. He's at his desk preparing a message for war when he gets the news that he's been waiting for, that in fact there has been bloodshed. So he alters his message of war saying, American blood has been spilled on American soil. The Mexicans have invaded the United States. So that's the beginnings of the war in May of 1846.
From Bent's Fort, Colorado, American troops launched their invasion of Santa Fe. Battles raged in Monterrey, Chapultepec, and Veracruz. War ended in 1848 when U.S. soldiers captured Mexico City.
By the way, a lot of people think, a lot of historians believe that's the most unjust war ever in the history of this country.
The United States called its war the U.S.-Mexican War, while Mexico defined it as the U.S. invasion. In the end, America increased its territory by 1.2 million square miles at 48 cents an acre.
So the effect was the loss of approximately 50% of Mexican territory, and the U.S. gaining the entire Southwest. Just imagine all of Texas, all of New Mexico, all of Arizona, California, Nevada, Utah, part of Wyoming, part of Colorado. Imagine that.
The United States gave Mexico $15 million for this entire territory. It's conscience money. You're trying to make yourself feel better for stealing other people's land. So you're giving them $15 million for the land, and you offered them $25 million before the war started for it. Bancroft, who was the Secretary of State, explained it better. He says, no, the reason we're doing it is so that future generations can say we purchased the property. And we've engaged in that historical fraud ever since 1848. It was land that was taken by force from a neighboring country.
Land once held by indigenous nations, then by Spain, then by Mexico, was now governed by the United States of America. Some citizens lived under 3 different flags within their lifetimes.
My great-great-grandfather, his name was Juan Antonio Baca. When he was born in 1820, he was born a Spanish citizen. When he was a year old, through no fault of his own, he became a citizen of Mexico because Mexico declared its independence from Spain. And at the age of 28, again through no fault of his own, he became a citizen of the United States. And so he was a citizen of 3 different countries and never moved.
In 1878, Juan Antonio Baca became a Colorado state senator. Exactly a century later, Polly Baca would do the same. For the Mexicanos living on U.S. soil, the end of the war should have relieved racial hostilities. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was written in part to protect their property and civil rights. Yet when the U.S. Senate ratified the war treaty, they removed all references to Mexican land grants. They weakened their political clout, ignored their citizenship rights, and made English the preferred language. Mexicanos, or citizens by default as they are known today, were granted 1 year to either remain in the U.S. or relocate to Mexico.
But they were from here. This was their home, this was their territory, this was their land. It wasn't really a choice for them. What were they going to go to, a different country?
Mexicanos were reduced to second-class citizens. California's greaser law limited their access to public places. Bullfights and cockfights were banned. Laws were no longer translated into the Spanish language. Voting rights were restricted. Throughout the Southwest, lynchings, whippings, and brandings went unpunished. Vigilante rings, often with permission from local authorities, seized thousands of acres of Mexican land grants.
Tucson ring in Arizona, Santa Fe ring in New Mexico, the Golden Crown in Colorado. The reason it's called the Golden Crown is for a while the territorial capital of Colorado was in Golden, Colorado.
Many tried to retain their ancestral lands by filing lawsuits. Those unable to pay an attorney with money paid with their land.
The courts were also conducted in the English language. The proceedings were held in a foreign language. If you were suddenly stuck in Russia, expected to defend yourself in a completely different language, what would you do?
You have to realize everybody was speaking Spanish. That's of white judges, a white attorney. You don't have a chance. And you could say, well, what about the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo? What about it? You know, so what? I mean, at that time, the United States was breaking virtually every treaty they were with the Indians. Why not do it with us? I mean, it was working for them. They were getting a lot of land, prime land.
Some land claims took 50 years to settle. La Sierra, part of the Sangre de Cristo land grant, is still being negotiated.
The Sangre de Cristo land grant is the second largest land grant in the United States. It is more than 1.2 million acres. And the Sangre de Cristo land grant is one of 2 or 3 land grants in the country that was a community land grant. It was there for the use of the entire community or the heirs to that land grant. So it should have never been put in the hands of a private owner. It was put in the hands of a private owner when the first territorial governor, William Gilpin, acquired that land from the Costilla Land Company. The Costilla Land Company happened to be part of the Santa Fe Ring. Their whole mission was to acquire as much land within the land grants and to continue the expansion from the East Coast to the West Coast. Manifest destiny, it was part of that ideology. It was sold several times into the hands of other private owners. In 1960, it landed in the hands of Jack Taylor. So he was able to come in and buy that land for less than $7 an acre. He acquired 77,000 acres for less than $7 an acre.
Anglo-Americans considered land a commercial commodity. They measured borders in degrees of longitude and latitude. They used written contracts. Mexicanos held land communally. They marked their land geographically. Their agreements were verbal.
You have the Anglo view that private property rights, whatever's in that property is mine, whether it's livestock or, more importantly, water. If I get the water and if the neighbor next door doesn't have no water, oh well, too bad, you're out of luck. For us as Mexicanos, we have a different concept. As Native Americans, we have a different concept. How can one person own a mountain? I still question that today. How can one man own 77,000 acres and not want to share with anybody? So for us, the concept of land and ownership was communal. It goes way back to the concept of familia. If I have something and your family needs something, I'm going to share. It's just part of our culture.
By force and by fraud, their land was confiscated. Some land became part of the National Park Service. Other land was parceled up in the 1862 Homestead Act, or awarded to Civil War veterans.
They dispossessed a population of their property. By 1890, 90% of the land was lost.
Nestled between the mountain ranges of the San Juans and the Sangre de Cristos lies El Valle de San Luis. Centuries ago, Spanish explorers laid claim to the valley, as did nations of the Navajo, Arapaho, Kiowa, and Ute. In 1851, the town of San Luis was settled by Mexicanos from Taos, New Mexico. San Luis is Colorado's oldest town and holds the first water rights, called the People's Ditch. Lowlands are saturated by the Culebra Creek on its way to the Rio Bravo del Norte, the Rio Grande River. The uplands of La Sierra are rich with timber, fish, and room for grazing. Colorado's San Luis Valley shares more than land and a border with the state of New Mexico. In 1861, when Colorado became a territory, it was stripped away from northern New Mexico. Today, many Coloradans consider themselves expatriated from their homeland.
Garcia, where I grew up, in Costilla, New Mexico, it's just a line. You can have 1 foot in New Mexico and 1 foot in Colorado. My grandparents used to say it divided families. You know, I had one grandmother that lived right over the border of New Mexico and one grandmother that lived right over the border of Colorado. I actually consider myself a New Mexican.
I still consider it occupied New Mexico, even if it is Colorado. It's still culturally, geographically, historically, northern New Mexico.
By the end of the 19th century, Colorado had transformed itself from an isolated western outpost to a thriving industrial state. Gold and silver mining spread across the mountains. Commercial agriculture cropped up along the South Platte and Arkansas River valleys. Railroad construction crisscrossed the state. The 1880s railroad boom created the country's first domestic labor shortage. America, in desperate need of workers, asked Mexico for theirs.
As the railroads grew and the mines grew, then we start to see Mexican immigration because they need more labor and more labor and more labor. Until in the East they're saying, stop already, we don't need any more Irish and Chinese, and please no more Germans. Where in the Southwest they're saying, bring us more from Mexico.
Mexicanos were invited to live and work in the U.S. When their labor was no longer needed, they were told to leave. This cycle of dependency would later define the U.S.-Mexican relationship into the 21st century.
So now the people are going from landowner to an urban setting where they have no experience. Now they're picking out the sugar beets. Now they're picking just the potatoes. Then they travel over here and then they're picking the lettuce. They have no land base. And here we have the rise of the migrant worker or the seasonal farm worker.
The first migrants to toil in the sugar beet fields of northern Colorado were the German Russians. Japanese solos or single men came next, followed by the Mexicanos. Through their efforts, Colorado became the leading producer of beet sugar in the nation. The Great Western Sugar Company produced recruitment films. They pursued large Mexican families from Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas. Great Western touted fair wages, nice homes, and the easy lifestyles of a migrant worker. Mexicanos and Mexican Americans became skilled at unskilled labor.
My parents were farm workers, my grandparents were farm workers, but they worked all the fields north of Denver, along Mount Greeley and Fort Lupton. They talked a lot about working from can't see in the morning to can't see at night, working, picking beans, topping onions, beets. My mother was always very positive. She bragged about how many bags of beans she picked and the work that she did in the fields. She was very proud of what she did and how she did it, and it was a very good, honest living.
I was growing up in a barrio in El Paso, and every summer I would see him disappear. And I said, where is Manuel? Where is Jose? They come back in a few months and they tell me all these fantastic stories of all the nice places they've been. And I says, man, I'm so poor I cannot even go to the corner. You guys go all over the nation on vacations. He said, ¿Qué vacations? It's not vacations. We go work in the fields, stupid. And so I was awakened by the fact that they went to work. They work under the American work ethic, meaning they truly believe that they work hard enough, they're going to succeed. And it's not true.
Your face is lined and wrinkled, and your age is 41. Your back is bent from picking, like your dying time has come. Your children's eyes are smiling, their lives have just begun. And what will you be giving to your brown-eyed children of the sun?
Migrant workers crowded into segregated communities called colonias or barrios. They lived near the sugar beet fields, far from the